You wouldn't believe what happened to my wife. She was attacked, and the people responsible weren't even real cops. They were fake HOA enforcers, but they still went too far. They shattered 7 of her ribs in broad daylight, and I was helpless until I found out who was behind it. But the real shock came when my father, my Navy SEAL dad, stepped in. He doesn't back down from anything. When he found out what happened, he didn't waste time. In just 6 seconds, he emptied his M4, and the situation escalated fast. It all started with a simple dispute over HOA rules, something so many of us have dealt with. But when these self-proclaimed enforcers went too far, my wife ended up in the ER with broken ribs, and my father wasn't going to stand for it. He took matters into his own hands, and that's when things got really intense. Now, what happened next? How did a family dispute turn into something that's still hard to believe? And who are these people pretending to be authority figures? Stick around, because you won't want to miss the crazy twist that's coming up. This story is far from over. The whole thing started on a quiet afternoon when my wife and I were having a lazy weekend. We live in a neighborhood that's supposed to be peaceful, just a small, tight-knit community. But that peace was shattered when 2 men knocked on our door, dressed like they were some kind of HOA officers. At first, we thought it was just some routine inspection, but it quickly turned ugly. They accused us of violating some obscure rule, something about our fence being half an inch too high. Ridiculous, right? When my wife tried to calmly explain that we had no idea about the rule, they became aggressive. These guys weren't just enforcers, they were acting like they had the power to do whatever they wanted. They pushed her aside when she tried to close the door, and that's when things took a dangerous turn. One of them shoved her hard, sending her crashing into the corner of the kitchen table. The pain was immediate. She couldn't breathe properly, and that's when I knew things had gone too far. I rushed her to the hospital, but it wasn't just the broken ribs that left me furious. It was the fact that no one was taking these fake officers seriously. I knew it was only a matter of time before my dad found out, and when he did, there was no going back. What he did next is something no one saw coming. As my wife recovered in the hospital, the anger in me kept growing. The doctors said her ribs would heal, but the emotional toll was something even they couldn't understand. It wasn't just the physical pain, it was the fact that these so-called HOA enforcers had crossed a line. They weren't supposed to have that kind of power, but somehow they thought they did. That's when the questions started piling up. Who were these people? Why do they think they could act like this without any real consequences? I tried to dig into their backgrounds, but it didn't make sense. There was no official record of their names in the HOA's database. No one knew who they were, or how they had come to occupy such a strange position of authority. It felt like someone was pulling strings from behind the scenes, someone powerful enough to make people believe they had control over others. I felt like I was being watched at every turn. Then there was the phone call. It came late one night, just as I was about to turn in. The voice on the other end was distorted, but the message was clear. Stop asking questions. Leave it alone, or we'll be back. That was enough to make my blood run cold. These weren't just random thugs. Whoever they were, they had a bigger agenda, and I was getting too close to the truth. But my dad, he wasn't backing down. He could see I was unraveling, but he had something planned, something big. And that's when I realized I was about to be pulled deeper into this nightmare than I ever expected. Days passed, but the pressure only mounted. The more I dug, the more I realized how deep this went. My wife's recovery was slow, but I wasn't just focused on her anymore. I was obsessed with finding out who these people really were and what they were after. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Sometimes, I'd see a car parked a little too long outside our house, or hear footsteps echoing behind me in quiet parts of town. I even started second-guessing my own friends and neighbors. Who could I trust? Then one night, my dad pulled me aside. He had been quieter than usual, like he was holding something back. I could see in his eyes that he knew what I was thinking. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it was always straight to the point. "You're not safe here anymore," he said. We need to move. But it wasn't just that. He had been preparing, training for something bigger. I didn't fully understand what he meant at first, but the look in his eyes told me that whatever was coming, it wasn't going to be something I could handle on my own. The tension kept building, like a ticking clock. My dad had arranged for us to meet someone, but who? And why were they so desperate to keep us quiet? As the day for the meeting approached, I could feel the walls closing in. I was in over my head, but so was my family. Something told me that the storm was about to break, and when it did, everything would change. I wasn't sure if we were ready, but I knew one thing for sure: we couldn't back down now. Not when we were this close to the truth. The night of the meeting arrived, and the air was thick with tension. My dad and I drove to the location in silence, both of us aware that this wasn't just a casual meeting, it was make or break. I kept replaying the distorted voice from the phone call in my head, the warning echoing like a distant drumbeat. But just as we pulled into the parking lot, something unexpected happened. A dark sedan slid into the spot next to us, its headlights blinding us for a moment. And then the door opened, and out stepped one of the men who'd attacked my wife. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. How was this possible? This man was supposed to be a fake HOA enforcer, nothing more. But here he was, walking toward us with an eerie calm, like he'd been expecting us all along. He didn't speak, just motioned for us to follow him. My dad, without hesitation, stepped out of the car, his eyes locked on the man in front of us. This wasn't part of the plan, and I could tell my dad wasn't happy about it either. We followed him through a narrow alley, but just as we neared the meeting spot, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were more people, shadow figures, gathered around in a circle, and at the center of it all was a large crate. The man with the cold eyes turned to us and said, "You've been asking the wrong questions. The real game starts now." I had no idea what he meant, but one thing was certain: whatever was in that crate, it wasn't good. We were way past the point of no return. The man with the cold eyes stood there, blocking the entrance to the crate, like he was daring us to make a move. My dad didn't flinch. He stepped forward, every muscle in his body coiled, ready for whatever was about to unfold. "You think you have control over this situation, but you're wrong," my dad said, his voice low and steady. There was a moment of silence, the kind that makes your heart skip a beat, before the man finally spoke. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about you or your wife. This is about power, about who controls the strings of the community." He grinned, a cold, knowing look in his eyes. "That crate, it's not just what you think it is." I glanced at my dad, who barely acknowledged my presence, focused entirely on the man. I could feel the tension building in my chest. What was in the crate? What had they been hiding all this time? Then, in a flash, the man opened the crate. Inside, I saw a laptop and a stack of files. I couldn't make sense of it at first. But as he pulled out a folder marked with the HOA's logo, the pieces started to fall into place. This is the real power. The deals, the money, the control of every neighborhood, every life. He tossed the folder at my feet. "You've been asking the wrong questions all along. It's not about a fence or your wife. It's about the bigger game we've been running." But just as my dad stepped forward, the unexpected happened. The man pulled a gun, not aimed at us, but at the crate. A shot rang out, and the laptop sparked, its screen going black. My heart pounded as I realized that all the answers, the evidence, the truth, were now destroyed. The man laughed, cold and hollow. "You think you've won? You haven't even scratched the surface." Before I could react, the shadows around us stirred, and I saw more figures stepping forward. They were part of the plan all along, and they weren't done with us yet. Just as my dad reached for his M4, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. Was it too late? Or had we just become part of something even bigger than we could ever imagine? The sirens grew louder, and for a moment, everything froze. The man with the gun took one last look at us before disappearing into the shadows. It was like he'd planned his escape all along, knowing the police would be here soon. But it didn't matter. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together.